Lieutenant Sarah Miller stepped through the massive iron gates of Pearl Ridge Naval Base with her small bag slung over her shoulder. The early morning sun reflected off the metal walls, and the sound of marching boots echoed in the distance. Everything around her looked sharp, serious, and disciplined, the very heart of the Navy. Sarah had dreamed of this moment for years, but she knew this wasn't going to be an easy start. She wasn't just joining a base. She was stepping into a world where every move, every look, and every word would be judged. As she walked across the training ground, she could feel eyes on her. Some were curious, some were doubtful. She was new, young, and most of all different. The reason for that difference was partly visible on her skin. Just below her collarbone, peeking slightly from her uniform, was a tattoo. A small, winged symbol with a faint military quote underneath. Courage is not the absence of fear. It wasn't flashy or colorful, but in a place where strict discipline ruled, even a small tattoo could draw attention. The whispers began almost immediately. A few recruits standing near the gate chuckled quietly. New girls got a tattoo? Guess she's here to make a statement. One of them muttered. Another laughed. Maybe she thinks she's a tough one. Probably watched too many war movies. Sarah heard them, but she didn't react. She had learned long ago that silence was stronger than anger. She adjusted her cap, lifted her chin, and walked straight ahead toward the orientation hall. Her steps were steady, her face calm. On the inside, though, she felt a small twist of pain. The tattoo wasn't something she wore to show off. It was a memory, a reminder of someone she could never forget. But no one knew that yet. To them, it was just ink. Inside the hall, officers barked orders, and new recruits scrambled to line up. The air smelled like fresh uniforms and nervous sweat. Sarah found her place in the line, standing tall, eyes fixed forward. The officer in charge, a tall, stern man named Commander Reeves, walked down the row, inspecting each new recruit. When he reached Sarah, his eyes stopped for a brief second on the mark near her collarbone. He didn't say a word, but she could see the hint of disapproval in his expression. He moved on, but the silence left behind was louder than any insult. After orientation, Sarah was assigned to the women's barracks. The room was filled with chatter and laughter as new faces introduced themselves. She met Officer Jenny Brooks, a lively girl with a big smile, and Maya Collins, quiet but observant. At first, things felt fine, until someone noticed the tattoo when Sarah changed into her workout gear. "Whoa, nice ink," Jenny said teasingly. "What's that supposed to mean? Trying to look like a Navy hero already?" Maya laughed softly. Maybe it's her way of saying she's not scared of anything. Sarah smiled politely, pretending not to care. "It's just something personal," she said simply. But that didn't stop the jokes. By evening, word had spread through the base. "The new girl's got a soldier tattoo," someone whispered in the cafeteria line. "She must really think she's special." It stung more than she wanted to admit. Sarah had faced tougher things in life than a few jokes. But this was different. Here, respect had to be earned, and she was starting at the bottom. Every glance at her tattoo reminded her why she was here and who she was doing this for. She touched it gently through the fabric of her uniform, feeling the raised lines beneath her fingers. That night, as lights went out in the barracks and everyone drifted to sleep, Sarah lay awake staring at the ceiling. Her brother's face came into her mind. His smile, his laughter, his voice saying, "You'll make it, little sis. Don't let anyone break you." It had been years since she lost him, but his words still guided her. The tattoo was his squad's emblem, Wings of Courage. He had it inked before his last mission, the one he never came back from. Sarah had promised herself that day that she would carry his spirit forward. Joining the Navy wasn't just a career, it was her way of keeping him alive. But she couldn't tell anyone that yet. They wouldn't understand, not until she proved herself. The next morning, as the base came alive again with commands and marching drills, Sarah stood in formation with the others. The sun hit her face, and the wind brushed against her uniform. She knew the laughter and whispers hadn't stopped. She could feel the stares, the quiet jokes, but she kept her focus straight ahead. Inside her, there was no anger, only determination. She wasn't there to impress anyone or explain her story. She was there to serve, to honor a promise, and to show what real courage looked like. The day would come when that small tattoo, the one everyone mocked, would speak louder than all their words. As the commander's whistle blew, the recruits began running laps around the field. Sarah's pace was steady and strong. Her legs burned, her lungs ached, but she didn't slow down. Every step felt like a message, to herself, to her brother, and to those who doubted her. One day she thought, they'll understand what this tattoo really means. And with that thought, she pushed forward, faster than before, leaving the whispers behind her in the dust. Days passed and Sarah began to settle into life at the Pearl Ridge Naval Base. But things weren't getting easier. The whispers about her tattoo had turned into open jokes now. Wherever she went, cafeteria, training ground, or dorm, someone always had something to say. During breakfast one morning, a group of recruits sat a few tables away, laughing and talking loudly. Sarah knew exactly who they were talking about when she heard one of them say, "I bet she got that tattoo after watching a military movie." Another added with a smirk, "Yeah, maybe she wants everyone to think she's some kind of war hero." The table burst into laughter. Sarah kept her eyes on her tray. She didn't react, didn't even look up. Years of learning to stay calm had taught her that silence sometimes spoke louder than words. Still, inside, her heart ached. She wasn't angry, just disappointed. They didn't know what that tattoo meant. They didn't know it wasn't about pride or attention. It was about memory. Later that day, during the afternoon drill, she stood with her unit under the scorching sun. Sweat rolled down everyone's faces as they held their positions. The instructor, Chief Morales, barked orders while walking along the line. Suddenly, one of the recruits, Jake, a tall man with a sarcastic grin, whispered just loud enough for others to hear, "Maybe the new girl's tattoo will give her superpowers today." A few others chuckled quietly. Morales turned sharply. "Something funny, recruit?" he shouted. The laughter stopped immediately. Jake shook his head, muttering, "No, sir." "Then keep your mouth shut and focus," Morales roared. Sarah stood completely still, eyes fixed straight ahead, but she could feel Jake's glare from the corner of her eye. The moment the instructor walked away, he whispered again, "Guess your tattoo saved you that time." Sarah ignored him, clenching her jaw but saying nothing. She had learned that reacting would only give them more reason to tease her. Instead, she focused on every command, every move, determined to be perfect. If she couldn't win their respect through words, she'd earn it through her actions. That evening, after a long day of drills and physical training, Sarah returned to the dorm. Her body ached, her muscles screamed, but she still sat on her bunk polishing her boots carefully. Jenny Brooks, the girl who once teased her in the barracks, noticed her quiet dedication. "You don't talk much, do you?" she said, trying to start a conversation. Sarah smiled faintly. "Talking won't make me stronger," she said softly. Jenny chuckled. "Fair enough. But you gotta admit, people are talking a lot about that tattoo." Sarah nodded. "I know. They can talk. I'll let my work speak instead." Jenny looked at her for a moment, as if trying to figure her out. "It must mean something, right? The tattoo." Sarah hesitated. "It does," she said, her voice low. "Something I can't forget." Jenny didn't push further. She just nodded and went back to her things. But something in her expression showed that maybe not everyone was against Sarah anymore. The next day brought a new challenge, the endurance test. It was a brutal session meant to push every recruit to their limits. Long runs, heavy lifts, obstacle courses, and mental drills. Many recruits dreaded it. Sarah saw it as her chance to prove herself. From the moment the whistle blew, she gave it everything she had. The sun beat down hard, but she didn't slow. Mud splashed across her uniform. Her lungs burned, but she kept moving. At one point, Jake stumbled and fell during the rope climb. While others laughed, Sarah extended her hand and helped him up without a word. He looked at her, surprised, but said nothing. She simply nodded and kept climbing. By the end of the test, Sarah finished among the top 3 recruits. Commander Reeves announced her score with a tone of surprise. Lieutenant Miller, impressive work. Keep that up. The same people who laughed at her earlier were silent now. Some looked at her differently, maybe with a hint of respect or at least confusion. They hadn't expected her to be that strong, that calm, that determined. That night, Sarah sat outside near the training field, the cool wind brushing against her face. She looked down at the tattoo on her skin, tracing the lines gently with her fingers. In the dim light, she whispered, "I did it, David." For her, every drop of sweat, every ache, and every insult wasn't just training. It was a step closer to her brother. He had been a soldier who always believed in courage and silence. He had told her once, "You don't have to shout to prove your worth, Sarah. Just stand tall when others can't." The laughter around the base didn't stop completely, but it started to fade. People began to notice that the girl they mocked never complained, never fought back, never failed to perform. Some even started to admire her discipline. But for Sarah, admiration didn't matter. She didn't want fame or attention. She wanted to live up to the memory of her brother, to wear his symbol with pride, not as decoration, but as a promise. As the lights in the base dimmed and the sound of footsteps faded into the night, Sarah sat quietly, the faint glow of the moon reflecting off her tattoo. It no longer felt like just a mark others mocked. It was her armor. The more they laughed, the stronger she became. And though no one knew her story yet, deep inside she knew, one day, the truth behind that tattoo would speak for itself. One day, the same people who mocked her would stand in silence. That night, the naval base was quiet. The lights in the dorms were off, and most of the recruits were fast asleep after another exhausting day. But Sarah Miller couldn't sleep. She sat on her bunk, staring at the small metal locker beside her bed. Inside it was something she kept hidden from everyone, a photograph that meant more to her than anything else. Slowly, she opened the locker and took it out. It was an old picture, slightly worn around the edges. In it stood a young man in a Navy flight suit, smiling confidently, his arm around a much younger Sarah. He looked proud, full of life, with the same tattoo on his arm that she now carried near her collarbone. His name was Captain David Miller, her older brother. He had been her hero, her protector, and her reason for joining the Navy. Sarah ran her finger gently over the image, her eyes growing misty. "You always said I could do anything, didn't you?" she whispered softly. The photo didn't answer, but in her heart, she could almost hear his voice again. The same warm tone that used to comfort her when things went wrong. David had been a rescue pilot in the Navy. A brave man who flew missions to save lives, no matter the risk. Everyone in their hometown admired him. He was the kind of soldier who inspired others to serve. When Sarah was little, she used to sit in his room, listening to his stories about the sky and the sea, about courage and loyalty. He would say, "Fear is natural, Sarah. What matters is what you do after fear hits you." When she was 15, David got a tattoo, a pair of wings with a quote beneath it, "Courage is not the absence of fear." He explained that it wasn't just a symbol of strength. It was a reminder to stay brave even when afraid. Sarah had laughed back then, saying she'd get one too someday. He smiled and said, "When you earn it." Years passed. David continued serving, and Sarah grew older, following his path. Then one day, a call came that shattered everything. His helicopter had gone down during a storm while trying to rescue stranded soldiers. He had saved everyone else, but he never made it back. Sarah remembered her mother's scream, the folded flag at the funeral, and the sound of military rifles firing in his honor. It was the day her world went silent. From that day forward, Sarah promised herself that she would carry her brother's spirit. She trained harder than anyone, studied endlessly, and joined the Navy, not to follow in his shadow, but to continue what he started. On the day she received her commission, she got the same tattoo on her skin, the same wings, the same words. It wasn't for show. It was her connection to him, her daily reminder that courage lived on. But at the base, no one knew any of this. To them, it was just a tattoo, something to mock, something to gossip about. She never explained it, not even to Jenny or Maya. Talking about it hurt too much. Keeping it inside was easier. That night, as she stared at the photo, a soft sound broke her thoughts. Couldn't sleep either? A gentle voice whispered. It was Jenny, who had woken up for water and noticed Sarah sitting alone. Sarah quickly wiped her eyes. Just thinking, she replied quietly. Jenny glanced at the photo in her hand. Is that your brother? Sarah nodded. For a moment, there was silence between them. Jenny sat beside her. You miss him, don't you? Every day, Sarah said softly. He was a Navy pilot. He died on a mission 6 years ago. Jenny looked down, her expression changing from curiosity to guilt. I didn't know. Everyone's been joking about your tattoo. We thought it was just for style. Sarah smiled faintly. It's not style. It's a promise. That tattoo, it was his. He had it before his last flight. She paused, taking a shaky breath. When they brought back his things, they found a letter for me. It said, "Keep your wings strong, little sister. Courage runs in your blood." So I got this. For him. Jenny's eyes softened. I'm sorry, Sarah. I shouldn't have laughed. It's okay, Sarah said gently. No one knew. And I don't mind the jokes. What matters is doing my duty. That's what he'd want. Jenny sat quietly, feeling both humbled and moved. He'd be proud of you, she said finally. Sarah looked at the photo one last time and nodded. I hope so. After Jenny went back to sleep, Sarah put the photo carefully into her locker and lay down. For the first time in weeks, her heart felt lighter. Someone finally knew the truth. Maybe, she thought, she didn't have to carry it all alone anymore. The next morning, as dawn painted the sky with shades of gold and pink, Sarah stood by the window, watching the flag rise above the base. The wind fluttered it proudly. She placed her hand over her tattoo and whispered, "For you, David, always." From that moment, something inside her changed. She no longer felt like an outsider. The jokes, the whispers, they still came, but they didn't sting the same way. She knew who she was and why she was there. Her strength didn't come from proving others wrong. It came from honoring her brother's memory. That day, during drills, Jenny stood beside her in formation. When one of the recruits whispered something about Sarah's tattoo again, Jenny turned sharply and said, "Shut it. You don't know what that tattoo means." The others looked surprised. Sarah didn't say anything. She just gave a small, grateful smile. As the training continued, she ran faster, worked harder, and stood taller. Every order she followed, every command she carried out, she did with a quiet pride. Because she wasn't just serving the Navy, she was serving her brother's legacy. No one else needed to understand the story behind the ink. One day they would. One day her silence would speak louder than all the laughter. The morning sun rose over the Pearl Ridge Naval Base, lighting up the steel walls and the ocean beyond. It was the start of an important day. A special inspection and training test had been announced the night before. Every recruit would be judged not just on strength, but also on teamwork, discipline, and leadership. Senior officers from other bases were coming to watch. There were even rumors that a high-ranking general would attend the session. For most recruits, the news brought excitement and fear. For Lieutenant Sarah Miller, it was another chance to prove herself. She had been quietly training harder than anyone else. Every morning, she woke up before dawn to run extra laps. Every night, she stayed back after drills to practice commands and formations. She knew people still whispered about her tattoo, but now fewer dared to laugh. She didn't want revenge or attention. She just wanted respect. That morning, Sarah stood in the parade ground, her uniform spotless, her face calm. The commander walked in front of the line. "Listen up," he barked. "Today is the endurance and leadership test. You'll be divided into squads. Each squad will complete a tactical drill, obstacle course, and navigation exercise. Your squad leader will guide you. Performance will be evaluated individually and as a team." When the squads were announced, everyone turned when the commander said, "Squad 3, Lieutenant Sarah Miller, team leader." A few surprised murmurs ran through the recruits. Some seemed doubtful. Jake, the tall recruit who once teased her, was in her team. He rolled his eyes but said nothing. Sarah just nodded and said, "Understood, sir." The moment the whistle blew, all squads ran to their starting points. Sarah gathered her team and quickly laid out a plan. Her voice was calm but firm. "We don't waste time. Stay close, watch each other, and move as one. Nobody falls behind." "Got it." Her confidence caught the team off guard. Even Jake gave a short nod. The first challenge was the mud obstacle. A long pit filled with water, ropes, and nets. Many struggled as the mud sucked at their boots. Sarah led the way, crawling fast and helping others through. When one recruit's boot got stuck, she turned back without hesitation, pulled him free, and shouted, "Move! Don't stop!" Her strength and quick thinking pushed them forward. Next came the rope climb and wall jump. The wall was tall, slippery from morning dew. A few tried and failed, sliding down again and again. Sarah took a running start, climbed halfway, and reached out her hand. "Grab my wrist!" she shouted. One by one, she helped her teammates up before pulling herself last. She didn't care about her score. She cared about finishing as a team. By the time they reached the navigation test, everyone was breathing hard. They had to locate hidden flags across a field using only a compass and a map. Sarah's brother had once taught her how to read maps and coordinates during their camping trips. His voice echoed in her head. "Always trust your direction, no matter the noise around you." She took a deep breath, focused on the compass, and started leading them through the field. While other squads got lost or argued, Sarah's team moved swiftly and smoothly. She made sure no one felt left behind. Her calmness gave her teammates confidence. Even Jake, who had doubted her before, followed her commands without question now. By the time they finished the course, they were muddy, exhausted, and covered in sweat. But they were also united. They had completed the entire drill with 0 penalties. When the final whistle blew, the squads lined up again. The officers observed from a distance, writing notes. And among them was a tall man in full uniform, the visiting general everyone had been talking about. His expression was unreadable, but his sharp eyes noticed everything. As the commander announced the results, the recruits stood straight, barely breathing. Squad 3, perfect coordination, top navigation, no time penalties. He looked up from his clipboard. "Excellent work, Lieutenant Miller." For the first time since she arrived, Sarah felt genuine recognition. The base, which once laughed at her tattoo, now watched her in silence. She didn't smile or boast. She simply saluted and said, "Thank you, sir." But what she didn't notice was that the general's eyes had lingered on her for a moment longer than the others. He had seen the mark near her collarbone, the wing tattoo partly visible from her uniform. His gaze hardened slightly, as if trying to remember something. After the test, while most recruits rested or joked about their scores, Sarah quietly cleaned her boots near the benches. Jake approached her, wiping sweat from his face. "Hey," he said awkwardly. "You were good out there. You didn't let anyone give up." Sarah looked up, a small smile forming. "We did it together. That's what matters." He nodded. "Yeah, guess I was wrong about you." "Maybe," she said gently, "but it's okay. Actions speak louder than tattoos." Jake chuckled lightly before walking away. For the first time, he seemed to mean his words. As the sun began to set, Sarah looked out at the open field, her body tired but her heart full. She touched her tattoo gently through the fabric of her uniform. "I did it, David," she whispered. "Just like you taught me." She didn't know yet that the general who had watched her would soon change everything, that her brother's past and her present were about to collide. But in that moment, she felt peace. She had finally shown that her strength wasn't in her tattoo or her name. It was in her will. That night, when she returned to the dorm, Jenny and Maya greeted her with smiles. "You were amazing today," Jenny said. Even the officers looked impressed. Sarah laughed softly. "Thanks. Just doing my job." Maya added, "You're not just doing your job. You're inspiring everyone." Sarah smiled but stayed humble. Deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. The next day would bring more drills, more challenges, but also something unexpected. The general who saw her tattoo would soon call her name, and the truth she had carried quietly would finally come to light. For now, though, she lay on her bunk, eyes heavy with exhaustion and pride. The laughter that once followed her had faded into quiet respect. And though she didn't know it yet, she was one step closer to the moment that would make the entire base fall silent. The morning after the big test was calm and quiet at Pearl Ridge Naval Base. The sky was a soft shade of orange as the sun rose, and the air carried the smell of sea salt and metal. Most recruits were still talking about the previous day's drill. Everyone knew Squad 3, led by Lieutenant Sarah Miller, had done something special. They hadn't just passed the test. They had impressed the officers with perfect teamwork. But what Sarah didn't know was that her actions had caught the attention of someone very important, the general who had watched the drills from a distance. His name was General Robert Hayes, a respected man with over 30 years of service. He rarely spoke much during inspections, but when he did, people listened. That day, the general requested another short review session with the top-performing squad. Commander Reeves announced it in the morning lineup. "Squad 3, he said loudly. "You will attend a special evaluation with General Hayes this afternoon. Be on your best behavior." Some recruits groaned nervously, but Sarah just nodded calmly. Inside, though, she felt a small knot of worry. She had heard about General Hayes. Strict, serious, and impossible to impress. She didn't want to make a single mistake. When the afternoon arrived, the recruits gathered in the training hall, standing in perfect formation. The doors opened, and General Hayes entered, his boots clicking against the floor. His presence alone filled the room with silence. He was a tall man in his late 50s, with sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. His uniform was covered in medals, and his voice carried quiet authority. He walked slowly down the line, inspecting each recruit. When he reached Sarah, he stopped. For a long moment, he said nothing. His eyes fell on the edge of her collar where part of her tattoo was faintly visible, the winged emblem. His expression changed slightly, almost as if he recognized it. But he didn't speak yet. He continued walking down the line, finishing the inspection before turning to the commander. "Excellent discipline," he said. "However, I'd like to speak to Lieutenant Miller privately." Everyone turned their heads slightly, surprised. Sarah's heart beat faster, but she stayed composed. "Yes, sir," she said. The general gestured toward the courtyard outside. They walked out together, the afternoon sun casting long shadows on the ground. For a moment they stood silently. Then the general spoke. "That tattoo," he said quietly, pointing toward her collarbone. "Where did you get it, Lieutenant?" Sarah hesitated. No one had ever asked her that directly. She straightened her posture and answered softly, "Sir, it belonged to my brother, Captain David Miller, from the 7th Air Rescue Wing." The general froze. His eyes widened, and for a few seconds he didn't speak. The wind blew gently, carrying the faint sound of drills from far away. Then his voice came out lower, almost emotional. "David Miller. Did you say Captain David Miller?" "Yes, sir," Sarah replied. "He was my brother. He died 6 years ago during a rescue mission." The general took a step back, removing his cap slowly. "Your brother," he whispered. "He saved my life." Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. "Sir." The general looked down, his voice trembling slightly as he spoke. "It was a stormy night over the Pacific. Our aircraft had gone down. We were stranded in the water, freezing, waiting for rescue. The one who came was your brother's team. He pulled me out of that water himself. I remember the mark on his arm, those same wings." Sarah's throat tightened. She could barely find her words. You knew him?" "I didn't just know him," the general said quietly. "He was one of the bravest men I ever met. He refused to leave until every last person was rescued. Even when his helicopter was running low on fuel, he stayed. And when the storm worsened, he made sure we were all lifted before he took off again. That was the last I saw of him." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The general looked at her tattoo again, his expression softening. "When I saw that mark during the test, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I never forgot it. That tattoo. It wasn't just a symbol. It was the emblem of his rescue unit. A sign of courage, loyalty, and sacrifice. Sarah's eyes glistened with tears she tried to hide. He used to tell me that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about doing the right thing even when you're scared. The general nodded slowly. That sounds like him. He straightened up, his usual sternness returning. But this time it carried warmth. Lieutenant Miller, your brother was a hero. And after watching you yesterday, I can see that his spirit lives on in you. Then, to Sarah's complete shock, the general took one step back, stood tall and saluted her. The gesture was silent but powerful. Every recruit nearby stopped what they were doing, watching in disbelief. Generals didn't salute lieutenants, it was supposed to be the other way around. Sarah quickly returned the salute, her heart pounding. She didn't know what to say. The general's eyes were full of respect. Your brother would be proud, he said firmly. And so am I. He turned and walked away slowly, leaving her standing there in stunned silence. The courtyard was quiet except for the sound of the wind. Sarah stood frozen for a long moment, tears slipping down her cheeks. Not of sadness, but of pride. The same tattoo that had once made people laugh had now made a general salute her in silence. Later that evening, word spread across the base. Everyone was talking about what had happened. Jake, Jenny, and the other recruits were speechless. Those who once mocked her now looked at her with deep respect. The laughter that once followed her had turned into admiration. That night, Sarah sat alone near the flagpole, looking at the stars above. She whispered softly, "You see that, David? He remembered you. They all know now." She touched her tattoo gently and smiled through her tears. It was no longer a secret, no longer just a mark of pain. It had become a badge of honor, shining with her brother's courage and her own strength. And for the first time since joining the base, Sarah didn't feel like an outsider anymore. She felt like she truly belonged. The sun had already begun to set behind the naval base, painting the sky in warm shades of orange and gold. The waves beyond the training field shimmered under the fading light. Everything looked calm, but inside the base, the air buzzed with whispers. Everyone was talking about what had happened earlier that day, the moment when General Hayes had saluted Lieutenant Sarah Miller in front of everyone. No one could believe it. A general saluting a junior officer was something unheard of. It wasn't just respect. It was an honor that very few people ever received. Recruits who had once laughed at Sarah's tattoo were now quiet, unsure what to say. Some were embarrassed, some were amazed, and a few even felt guilty. Sarah, meanwhile, sat alone on a bench near the training ground. The last rays of sunlight touched her face. Her mind was still replaying what had happened. She could still hear the general's voice in her ears. Your brother was a hero, and so am I. Every time she thought about it, her chest filled with both pride and sadness. She didn't expect any of this. She never wanted attention or glory. All she wanted was to make her brother proud and serve her country the way he did. But now his name and the story behind her tattoo had touched the entire base. As she sat there lost in thought, she heard footsteps approaching. She looked up and saw General Hayes walking toward her again, this time without his cap, his expression softer than before. "Lieutenant Miller," he said quietly, "do you have a moment?" Sarah quickly stood up and saluted him. "Of course, sir." He smiled faintly. "At ease. Sit down." They both sat on the bench, the sound of the waves filling the short silence between them. The general looked into the distance for a while before speaking again. "I hope my actions today didn't make things difficult for you. I didn't plan to make a scene. It just happened. When I saw that tattoo, I couldn't help myself." Sarah shook her head gently. "No, sir. You didn't make things difficult. You gave me, and my brother, more honor than I ever imagined." The general nodded, his face thoughtful. "You know, I never forgot that mission," he said. "It was one of the darkest nights of my life. The storm was fierce, and our plane had gone down in the ocean. We thought we were done for. Then we saw the rescue chopper's light cutting through the rain. Your brother was flying it." Sarah listened quietly, her hands folded in her lap. He risked everything that night, the general continued. Waves were crashing. The wind was tearing the aircraft apart, but he didn't stop. I remember shouting at him over the radio to pull back, but he refused. He said, "Sir, not until everyone's safe." He saved all 6 of us. The general paused, his voice growing heavier. When the storm cleared, we heard that his helicopter went down on the way back to base. I carried that guilt for years. I always felt that maybe, if he had turned back when I told him to, he might still be alive. Sarah swallowed hard, tears welling in her eyes. He wouldn't have done it any other way, sir. He believed in saving others first. That's who he was. The general nodded slowly. Yes, I see that now. And when I saw you lead your team yesterday, I saw the same courage in you. The same calm. The same fire in your eyes that he had. It felt like he was standing there again. Through you. Sarah's eyes shimmered with emotion. She whispered, "He used to tell me that courage runs in our blood. I never thought anyone would notice." The general smiled gently. Courage doesn't shout, Lieutenant. It just acts. That's why it stands out. They both sat in silence for a moment, letting the cool sea breeze wash over them. Then the general stood up. "There's something I'd like to do," he said. "Tomorrow we'll hold a small ceremony in the main hall, a memorial for Captain David Miller. His bravery deserves to be remembered properly. You will be there as his representative." Sarah's eyes widened. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "Just say yes," the general replied warmly. "It's time the world knows what kind of man your brother was, and what kind of officer you are." Sarah nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "Yes, sir. Thank you." The next day, the base was gathered in the main hall. The American flag stood tall behind the podium. The air was filled with quiet respect. Officers and recruits lined up neatly as General Hayes stepped up to speak. Sarah stood beside him, her heart pounding. "6 years ago," the general began, "we lost one of our finest men, Captain David Miller. His courage saved lives, including mine. Today, we honor his memory and the legacy he left behind." He turned slightly toward Sarah. "That legacy lives on in Lieutenant Sarah Miller, who serves with the same honor, strength, and heart as her brother once did." The room was completely silent. Some recruits lowered their heads. Others wiped away tears. Sarah felt a lump in her throat. The general then took out a small medal, the Medal of Valor that had been awarded posthumously to her brother years ago, and placed it in Sarah's hands. "This belongs to your family," he said softly, "and so does our respect." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She saluted the general, her voice steady despite the emotion. "Thank you, sir. I'll make sure his legacy lives on." The general returned the salute. "It already does, Lieutenant. It already does." After the ceremony, as the crowd slowly dispersed, many of the recruits approached Sarah. Even Jake, the one who once mocked her, stood quietly before her. "I'm sorry," he said sincerely. "I didn't know." Sarah gave him a gentle smile. "It's okay. You know now." That evening, she walked alone to the edge of the base, where the sea met the rocks. The wind blew softly through her hair as she looked out at the horizon. She touched her tattoo lightly and whispered, "You were right, David. Courage really does run in our blood." The waves crashed below, as if answering her. For the first time since she arrived, Sarah felt peace. Her brother's memory wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to everyone who had heard his story, and she knew, deep in her heart, that she was no longer walking his path alone. The morning after the ceremony felt different at Pearl Ridge Naval Base. The air was fresh, the sky was bright, and the atmosphere was lighter than it had been in weeks. Everyone seemed more respectful, more united. And at the heart of that change was Lieutenant Sarah Miller. The story of the tattoo, her brother's sacrifice, and the general's salute had spread like wildfire through the base. Recruits whispered about it in the cafeteria, officers spoke of it in meetings, and even the senior commanders mentioned it with pride. What started as a story of mockery had turned into a symbol of honor and inspiration. But for Sarah, the real change wasn't in how people saw her, It was in how she saw herself. For the first time since joining the Navy, she didn't feel like she was living in her brother's shadow. She was walking in her own light, carrying his legacy forward with pride instead of pain. That morning, as she prepared for another drill session, she noticed how everyone greeted her differently. No more awkward stares, no more teasing smiles. When she entered the training field, the chatter died down, and the recruits stood a little straighter. Even Jake, who used to mock her, gave her a respectful nod. "Morning, Lieutenant," he said softly. "Morning," Sarah replied, smiling just a little. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, and that was enough. The drill began like any other, commands shouted, boots stomping, rifles clacking. But there was a new kind of energy among the recruits. They followed Sarah's orders with precision and pride. She had earned their respect not through rank, but through strength, calmness, and the truth of her story. As the training ended, Commander Reeves approached her with a message. "Lieutenant Miller," he said, "General Hayes would like to see you in the main yard at 1500 hours. Sarah straightened immediately. "Yes, sir." The hours passed slowly. When the clock struck 3, she walked across the base, her boots crunching on the gravel. The main yard was already crowded with officers, recruits, and even some civilians from the Naval Administration. Something big was about to happen, but no one knew exactly what. At the front stood General Hayes, his posture firm and his face calm. As Sarah approached, he gave her a small nod. "Lieutenant Miller," he said, his voice carrying across the crowd. "Thank you for coming." Sarah saluted him. "Sir." The general looked around at the gathered people. "Most of you know what happened yesterday," he began. "But today we're here to do something even more important. To remind everyone what true courage looks like." The crowd went silent. The general turned slightly toward Sarah. "Lieutenant Miller," he said, "step forward." Sarah did. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, but she kept her head high. The general continued speaking, his voice strong but full of warmth. "Courage isn't about rank, or medals, or recognition. It's about standing tall when others doubt you. It's about carrying pain with pride and turning loss into strength. Lieutenant Miller has shown us exactly that." Murmurs spread through the crowd, admiration, respect, even a few tears from those who knew the full story. The general took a deep breath and looked directly at her. "Your brother, Captain David Miller, once saved my life. But today, Lieutenant, it's you who has saved the spirit of this base. You reminded us all what it truly means to serve, with heart, with dignity, and with honor." Then, to everyone's astonishment, the general stepped back and raised his hand in a salute. The yard went completely silent. Every single person froze, stunned. A general saluting a lieutenant again, and this time in front of the entire base, was beyond anything they had seen before. It was a moment of pure respect, a silent acknowledgement of something greater than rank or rules. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Her heart pounded, but she stood firm, returning the salute with tears glistening in her eyes. For a few seconds, time seemed to stop. The sun reflected off their uniforms, the flag fluttered behind them, and the sound of the ocean filled the still air. It was a moment no one would ever forget. Then, slowly, Commander Reeves stepped forward and saluted too. One by one, every officer, every recruit followed. Within seconds, the entire yard was filled with hundreds of salutes, all directed at Sarah. The sight was breathtaking. Rows and rows of soldiers stood tall, their faces solemn, their eyes proud. Sarah could barely hold back her tears. She had once been laughed at because of her tattoo. Now that same tattoo had become a mark of honor, a symbol of bravery shared between her, her brother, and everyone who believed in true service. When the general finally lowered his hand, he said quietly but firmly, "From this day forward, that tattoo will not be mocked. It will be respected. It represents sacrifice, something this base should never forget." The crowd stood in respectful silence. Then, slowly, they began to applaud. It wasn't loud or chaotic. It was powerful and heartfelt. Sarah bowed her head slightly, overwhelmed by emotion. After the ceremony, As the crowd dispersed, several recruits approached her. Jake was among the first. He looked nervous but determined. "Lieutenant," he said, "I just want to say, I was wrong. That tattoo, it's not just ink. It's a story. A story worth saluting." Sarah smiled warmly. "Thank you, Jake. I think we all learned something important today." As the sun began to set again, Sarah walked toward the pier. The ocean breeze brushed against her face, and she looked down at her tattoo, the winged emblem shining faintly in the light. She whispered softly, "We did it, David. You're still saving people. Even from up there." The waves sparkled like gold, and the sound of distant salutes echoed in her heart. Sarah knew this was not just her story anymore. It was her brother's legacy, reborn through her courage. And that day, every soul at Pearl Ridge Naval Base carried a piece of that legacy forward. A reminder that sometimes, the smallest marks tell the biggest stories. A few weeks passed after the unforgettable day when General Hayes saluted Lieutenant Sarah Miller in front of the entire base. But the memory of that moment still lived fresh in everyone's mind. People spoke about it with pride, and even the youngest recruits used Sarah's story as motivation to work harder and serve with honor. What had once started as laughter over a simple tattoo had turned into a powerful lesson about courage, sacrifice, and respect. Sarah's life at the naval base had changed completely. Wherever she went, people greeted her with admiration. But she never let the respect get to her head. She was still the same calm, humble woman who worked hard every single day. For her, the salute wasn't a symbol of pride. It was a reminder of her brother, Captain David Miller, and the legacy he had left behind. Every morning, Sarah would wake before sunrise, stand by the window of her barracks, and look toward the ocean. The rising sun painted the waves in shades of gold, and she would whisper softly, "Good morning, David. Another day to make you proud." One day, while she was leading a group of recruits in training, a message arrived from the command office. Commander Reeves handed it to her with a smile. "Lieutenant Miller," he said, "General Hayes wants to see you in his office." Sarah blinked in surprise. "Now, sir?" "Yes," he nodded. "He said it's important." Sarah wiped the sweat from her forehead, adjusted her uniform, and made her way toward the general's office. As she approached, she could feel a strange mixture of curiosity and nervousness. The last time she'd been called to his office, her life had changed forever. When she entered, General Hayes was standing near his desk, looking over a folder. He looked up and smiled faintly. "Ah, Lieutenant Miller. Good to see you. Please have a seat." Sarah saluted and sat down. "Thank you, sir. Is everything all right?" The general nodded slowly. "More than all right. I've been thinking about something for a while now. About your brother. And about you." He paused for a moment before continuing. "You see, your brother's rescue mission, the one where he gave his life, has been recorded in our archives, but it was never given full recognition. There was no official memorial. No proper place where his story could inspire others." Sarah's eyes softened. "I know, sir. My family always hoped his courage would be remembered, but we didn't expect anything more. He never wanted fame." The general smiled gently. "That's exactly why he deserves it. Men like him and officers like you represent the best of what this country stands for. Which is why, next week, we're holding a special ceremony in Washington. The Navy has approved a new memorial wing in honor of fallen rescuers. And the first name to be engraved there will be Captain David Miller." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "Sir, I don't know what to say." The general leaned forward. "You'll be attending the ceremony as his representative. And there's something else. I've also recommended your promotion. Your leadership, your bravery, and your heart have set a standard for everyone here." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. "Thank you, sir. That means more than I can ever say." A week later, Sarah stood in front of the Grand Memorial Hall in Washington, D.C. The air was cool, and the massive American flag waved proudly in the breeze. Generals, officers, and families of other fallen heroes filled the seats. At the front of the stage was a shining black marble wall with names engraved in gold. heroes who had given their lives to save others. Sarah stood beside General Hayes, her heart heavy but full. As the ceremony began, the announcer's voice echoed across the courtyard. Today, we honor the brave men and women of the Navy Rescue Division who gave everything for others. Among them, Captain David Miller, whose courage continues to inspire generations. Sarah felt her eyes sting with tears as her brother's name was revealed on the wall, shining in the sunlight. The crowd applauded, and a wave of emotion swept through her. It was as if David himself stood beside her, smiling proudly. General Hayes turned toward her. "Would you like to say a few words, Lieutenant?" Sarah hesitated, but then she nodded and stepped up to the podium. The microphone stood tall in front of her as she looked at the crowd, and then at her brother's name on the wall. Her voice was steady but filled with feeling. "My brother once told me that courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about standing up when everyone else steps back. He lived by that, and because of him, I learned what true strength means." She paused for a moment, her eyes glistening. "People used to laugh at my tattoo, the one I wear in his honor. They didn't know what it meant. But now, I realize that the tattoo isn't just his memory. It's a promise. A promise to keep doing what he couldn't finish. A promise to serve with the same heart he did." The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. "If you take anything from his story," Sarah continued, "let it be this: never judge what you don't understand. Sometimes what you laugh at might carry the deepest meaning." When she finished, there was a long silence, and then the crowd rose to their feet in a standing ovation. Sarah stepped back, overwhelmed, as applause filled the air. After the ceremony ended, General Hayes stood beside her once more. "Your brother would have been proud," he said quietly. "And so am I." Sarah smiled through her tears. "Thank you, sir. But I think he's the one who deserves all the credit. I just followed his light." The general shook his head. "No, Lieutenant. You carried it." As the sun began to set, Sarah stood before her brother's name on the wall, tracing the golden letters gently with her fingers. The sky was painted in brilliant orange and purple, the same colors she remembered from their childhood evenings. She whispered softly, "You're home now, David, and your story will never be forgotten." A breeze passed by, gentle and warm, as if her brother was answering her. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling peace fill her heart. She walked away from the memorial with her head held high, her tattoo shining faintly under the fading sunlight. It was no longer just a mark of memory. It had become a symbol of strength, courage, and eternal love between a brother and sister. And as she looked back one last time, she knew that the salute, the laughter, and the pain had all led to this moment. The day her brother's legacy finally touched the hearts of the world.